Hello, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. This is Shiny with Jesus Bytes. I want to welcome you back on our journey of exploring the Bible together. We will continue with the Old Testament, the third book, the book of Leviticus, and we will cover chapters 12 through 14 today. Purification after childbirth. Chapter 12. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a male child, she will be unclean 7 days, as she is during the days of her menstrual impurity. The flesh of his foreskin must be circumcised on the 8th day. She will continue in purification from her bleeding for 33 days. She must not touch anything holy or go into the sanctuary until completing her days of purification. But if she gives birth to a female child, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as she is during her menstrual impurity. She will continue in purification from her bleeding for 66 days. When her days of purification are complete, whether for a son or a daughter, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He will present them before the Lord and make atonement on her behalf. She will be clean from her discharge of blood. This is the law for a woman giving birth, whether to a male or female. But if she doesn't have sufficient means for a sheep, she may take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Then the priest will make atonement on her behalf, and she will be clean. Skin diseases. Chapter 13. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "When a person has a swelling, scab, or a spot on the skin of his body, and it becomes a disease on the skin of his body, he is to be brought to Aaron, the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest will examine the infection on the skin of his body. If the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a skin disease. After the priest examines him, he must pronounce him unclean. But if the spot on the skin of his body is white, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair has not turned white, the priest must quarantine the infected person for 7 days. The priest will then re-examine him on the 7th day. If the infection remains unchanged in his sight and has not spread on the skin, the priest must quarantine him for another 7 days. The priest will examine him again on the 7th day. If the infection has faded and has not spread to the skin, the priest is to pronounce him clean. It is a scab. The person is to wash his clothes and will become clean. But if the scab spreads further on his skin, after he has presented himself to the priest for his cleansing, he must present himself again to the priest. The priest will examine him, and if the scab has spread on the skin, then the priest must pronounce him unclean. He has a skin disease. When a skin disease develops on a person, he is to be brought to a priest. The priest will examine him. If there is a white swelling on the skin that has turned the hair white, and there is a patch of raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic disease on the skin of his body, and the priest must pronounce him unclean. He need not quarantine him, for he is unclean. But if the skin disease breaks out completely over the skin, so that it covers all the skin of the infected person, from his head to his feet, so far as the priest can see, the priest will look, and if the skin disease has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the infected person clean. Since he has turned totally white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. When the priest examines the raw flesh, he must pronounce him unclean. Raw flesh is unclean. It is a skin disease. But if the raw flesh changes and turns color and turns white, he must go to the priest. The priest will examine him, and if the infection has turned white, the priest must pronounce the infected person clean. He is clean. When a boil appears on the skin of one's body and it heals, and a white swelling or a reddish white spot develops where the body was, the person must present himself to the priest. The priest will make an examination, and if the spot seems to be beneath the skin and the hair in it has turned white, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a skin disease that has broken out in the boil. But when the priest examines it, if there is no white hair in it, and it is not beneath the skin but is faded, the priest must quarantine him 7 days. If it spreads further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is an infection. But if the spot remains where it is and does not spread, it is only the scar from the boil, the priest is to pronounce him clean. When there is a burn on the skin of one's body produced by fire, and the patch made raw, but the burn becomes a reddish white or white spot, the priest is to examine it. If the hair in the spot has turned white, and the spot appears to be deeper than the skin, it is a skin disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a skin disease. But when the priest examines him, if there is no white hair in the spot, and it is not beneath the skin but is faded, the priest must quarantine him for 7 days. The priest will re-examine him on the 7th day. If it has spread further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a skin disease. But if the spot has remained where it was, and has not spread on the skin, but is faded, it is a swelling from the burn. The priest is to pronounce him clean, for it is only the scar from the burn. When a man or a woman has an infection on the head or chin, the priest must examine the infection. If it appears to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it is yellow and sparse, the priest must pronounce the person unclean. It is a scaly outbreak, a skin disease of the head or chin. When the priest examines the scaly infection, if it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest must quarantine the person with the scaly infection for 7 days. The priest will re-examine the infection on the 7th day. If the scaly outbreak has not spread and there is no yellow hair in it, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, the person must shave himself, but not shave the scaly area. Then the priest must quarantine the person who has the scaly outbreak for another 7 days. The priest will examine the scaly outbreak on the 7th day, and if it has not spread on the skin and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, the priest is to pronounce the person clean. He is to wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the scaly outbreak spreads further on the skin, after his cleansing, the priest is to examine the person. If the scaly outbreak has spread on the skin, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. The person is unclean. But if as far as he can see, the scaly outbreak remains unchanged and black hair has grown in it, then he has healed. He is clean. The priest is to pronounce the person clean. When a man or a woman has white spots on the skin of the body, the priest is to make an examination. If the spots on the skin of the body are dull white, it is only a rash that has broken out on the skin. The person is clean. If a man loses the hair off his head, he is bald, but he is clean. Or if he loses the hair at his hairline, he is bald on his forehead, but he is clean. But if there is a reddish-white infection on the bald head or forehead, it is a skin disease breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swelling of the infection on his bald head or forehead is reddish-white, like the appearance of a skin disease on his body, the man is afflicted with a skin disease. He is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean. The infection is on his head. The person afflicted with an infectious disease is to have his clothes torn and his hair hanging loose, and he must cover his mouth and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." He will remain unclean as long as he has the infection. He is unclean. He must live alone in a place outside the camp. Contaminated fabrics. If a fabric is contaminated with mildew in wool or linen fabric, in the warp or woof of linen or wool, or in leather or anything made of leather, and if the contamination is green or red in the fabric, the leather, the warp, the woof, or any leather article, it is a mildew contamination, and it is to be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the contamination and quarantine the contaminated fabric for 7 days. The priest is to re-examine the contamination on the 7th day. If it has spread in the fabric, the warp, the woof, or the leather, regardless of how it is used, the contamination is harmful, mildew, it is unclean. He is to burn the fabric, the warp, or woof in the wool or linen, or any leather article which is contaminated. Since it is harmful mildew, it must be burned up. When the priest examines it, if the contamination has not spread in the fabric, the warp, the woof, or any leather article, the priest is to order whatever is contaminated to be washed and quarantined for 7 days. After it has been washed, the priest is to re-examine the contamination. If the appearance of the contaminated article has not damaged or changed, it is unclean, even though contamination has not spread. You must burn up the fabric. It is a fungus on the front or back of the fabric. If the priest examines it, and the contamination has faded after it has been washed, he must cut the contaminated section out of the fabric, the leather, the warp, or woof. But if it reappears in the fabric, the warp, the woof, or any leather article, it has broken out again. You must burn up whatever is contaminated. But if the contamination disappears from the fabric, the warp, or woof, or any leather article which has been washed, it is to be washed again, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning a mildew contamination in wool or linen fabric, warp or woof, or any leather article, in order to pronounce it clean or unclean. Cleansing skin diseases. Chapter 14. The Lord spoke to Moses. This is the law concerning the person afflicted with a skin disease on the day of his cleansing. He is to be brought to the priest, who will go outside the camp and examine him. If the skin disease has disappeared from the afflicted person, the priest will order the two live clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop be brought for the one who is to be cleansed. Then the priest will order that one of the birds be slaughtered over the fresh water in a clay pot. He is to take the live bird together with the cedar wood, scarlet yarn, hyssop, and dip them all into the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. He will then sprinkle the blood 7 times on the one who is to be cleansed from the skin disease. He is to pronounce him clean and release the live bird over the open courtyard. Then one who is to be cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe with water. He is clean. Afterwards he may enter the camp, but he must remain outside his tent for 7 days. He is to shave off all his hair again on the 7th day, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, and the rest of his hair. He is to wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. He is clean. On the 8th day, he must take 2 unblemished male lambs, an unblemished year-old ewe lamb, a grain offering of 3 quarts of fine flour mixed with olive oil, and 1/3 of a quart of olive oil. The priest who performs the cleansing will place the person who is to be cleansed, together with these offerings, before the Lord at the entrance to the tent meeting. The priest is to take 1 male lamb and present it as a restitution offering, along with 1/3 quart of olive oil, and he must wave them as a presentation offering before the Lord. He is to slaughter the male lamb at the place in the sanctuary area where the sin offering and burnt offering are slaughtered. For like the sin offering, the restitution offering belongs to the priest. It is especially holy. The priest is to take some of the blood from the restitution offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Then the priest will take some of 1/3 of the quart of olive oil and pour it into his left palm. The priest will dip his right finger into the oil in his left palm and sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. From the oil remaining in his palm, the priest will put some on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the restitution offering. What is left of the oil in the priest's palm, he is to put on the head of the one to be cleansed, In this way the priest will make atonement for him before the Lord. The priest must sacrifice a sin offering and make atonement for the one who is to be purified from his uncleanness. Afterwards, he will slaughter the burnt offering. The priest is to offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. The priest will make atonement for him, and he will be clean. But if he is poor and cannot afford these, he is to take one male lamb for the restitution offering, to be waved in order to make atonement for him, along with 2 quarts of fine flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, and 1/3 of quart of olive oil, and 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons, whatever he can afford. One is to be a sin offering, and the other a burnt offering. On the 8th day, he is to bring these things for his cleansing to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest will take the male lamb for the restitution offering, and the 1/3 of a quart of olive oil, and wave them as a presentation offering to the Lord. After he slaughters the male lamb for the restitution offering, the priest is to take some of the blood of the restitution offering and put it on the right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Then the priest will pour some of the oil into his left palm. With his right finger, the priest will sprinkle some of the oil in his left palm 7 times before the Lord. The priest will also put some of the oil in his palm on the right earlobe of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the same place as the blood of the restitution offering. What is left of the oil in the priest's palm, he is to put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. He must then sacrifice one type of what he can afford, either the turtle doves or the young pigeons, one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, sacrificing what he can afford together with a grain offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement before the Lord for the one to be cleansed. This is the law for someone who has a skin disease and cannot afford the cost of his cleansing. Cleansing contaminated objects. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "When you enter the land of Canaan that I am giving you as a possession, and I place a mildew contamination in a house in the land of that you possess, the owner of the house is to come and tell the priest, 'Something like mildew contamination has appeared in my house.' The priest must order them to clear the house before he enters to examine the contamination, so that nothing in the house becomes unclean. Afterwards the priest will come to examine the house. He will examine it, and if the contamination in the walls of the house consists of green or red indentations that appear to be beneath the surface of the wall, the priest is to go outside the house to its doorway and quarantine the house for 7 days. Then the priest is to return on the 7th day and examine it. If the contamination has spread on the walls of the house, the priest must order that the stones with the contamination be pulled out and thrown into the unclean place outside the city. He is to have the inside of the house completely scraped, and the plaster that is scraped off must be dumped in an unclean place outside the city. Then they must take the different stones to replace the former ones, and take additional plaster to replaster the house. If the contamination reappears in the house after the stones have been pulled out, and after the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest must come and examine it. If the contamination has spread in the house, it is harmful mildew. The house is unclean. It must be torn down with its stones, its beams, and all its plaster, and taken outside the city to an unclean place. Whoever enters the house during any of the days that the priest quarantines it will be unclean until evening. Whoever lies down in the house is to wash his clothes, and whoever eats in it is to wash his clothes. But when the priest comes and re-examines it, if the contamination has not spread in the house after it has been replastered, he is to pronounce the house clean because the contamination has disappeared. He is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop to purify the house. And he is to slaughter one of the birds over a clay pot containing fresh water. He will take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He will purify the house with the blood of the bird, the fresh water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and scarlet yarn. Then he is to release the live bird into the open countryside outside the city. In this way, he will make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. This is the law for any skin disease or mildew, for a scaly breakout, for mildew in clothing or on a house, and for a swelling scab or spot, to determine what something is unclean or clean. This is the law regarding skin disease and mildew. The word of the Lord. Have a blessed day. Ciao.